I was just thinking the other day, the investment side of Magic the Gathering or Pokemon or whatever is interesting. And it started before Alpha Investments. It started before Rudy. There were some other people, smaller creators, suggesting different things to do with sealed product and investing. And even before that, there was Reddit and other forums and stuff like that where they discussed, the single card market and investing in singles and that kind of stuff. So it's been around for a bit, but Alpha Investments really solidified the talk about investing in cardboard and stuff like that. I don't advocate for it, and I don't say that you shouldn't do it. I'm just saying that it's up to the individual and whether or not they believe that their money is well spent by parking it in these things, and whether or not it will grow at the rate of the S&P or more, or whether you can make good financial decisions based on investing in cardboard. What I find interesting, though, is that Alpha Investments, from my perspective anyway, seems to have also brought another bit of knowledge to people. And I don't know whether there were financial bros on YouTube before Alpha Investments, or whether maybe he inspired some of them to actually just go straight up into investment stuff on YouTube, or whether that was always there and it just kind of grew into eventually Graham Stephan, who I believe is the largest creator for that kind of stuff. And I remember watching this video, or maybe actually several people have talked about this, that eventually the investment advice runs out because there's only so much you can say about investing in index funds. Really, all you can say is park your money in index fund and it grows better than the S&P, or it grows with the S&P, and there aren't traders out there that can beat an index fund over a long period of time, right? So that seems to be the most solid advice people can get for how to save for your retirement. And I don't know whether there were YouTubers, doing this kind of investment advice that was, somewhat had a bit of trust, right? I don't know whether it was just scam artists or nobody on YouTube until Graham Stephan came along talking about this kind of stuff. I think I saw stuff about real estate in the early days before, like, in 2016, 2014, maybe, but I might be mistaken. But to get back to Alpha Investments, it's not just about how he talks about, how to work with distribution and how to grow a business and how to start a card store, and don't start a card store unless you have tons of money available in cash, so that you can purchase things at a moment's notice and pay for any unexpected things. He gives a lot of advice like that, and he dissuades people from getting into starting a card store or doing what he does, because it's not as profitable as people think, at least in the first several years, and people can really ruin their financial situation by doing that. Now, someone who's younger can recover from that a lot easier than someone who's older. So, you could completely bankrupt yourself at like 23 or 24, and you could bounce back from that. So while I guess he's trying to protect people, if people really want to do something and they really want to put themselves out there and try and work hard, then they should probably do it. The video, though, that I'm making here is about the financial advice that he gives, because a through line throughout all of his videos from the very beginning have been people writing into him asking about other investing other than sealed product or single cards or whatever, right? So he talks mainly about the cardboard, mainly about the retail side of stuff. But then, especially in his Q&As, but even in just regular, whatever video he's talking about using your money wisely, he talks about the sound fundamentals, I guess, of investing, or at least saving for your retirement. And, obviously the number one thing for him is time and, basically, spending your money wisely, but also spending your time wisely and working hard. And then not basically spending stuff on frivolous things and putting it into essentially an index fund, some kind of, obviously most people don't really like mutual funds these days, and the reason is because they have high fees because they're managed funds. But what you want is something that is a fund that's less managed, therefore less fees, and that's why index funds are better, because they just buy and they hold, and they don't do a lot of buying, selling, and maneuvering and that kind of stuff. So then instead of paying 2 to 3% in fees, you end up paying 0.25 or 0.5% in fees. So you save a lot of money. And the growth expectation on these things are, they used to be 6 to 7%. Rudy used to say like he wanted to make 5 to 7%. As long as he could do that every year, then he was fine. But now it's increased a little. I don't know whether it's due to inflation or just because the market's hot and he wants to stay relevant to the percentage that people are saying. But the point is, if you have something, whether it's 6% or whether it's 8%, if you're paying 3% in fees, well then you're back down to 3% or 5%. So you at 3% you're barely growing above inflation. So it's not really much of an investment, because all you're doing is parking your money and you're getting the same money out later, and it still has the same buying potential, but it hasn't grown. Anyway, to get back to it, this is what some of the things that Rudy has talked about throughout his alpha investments career, and this is the kind of stuff that Graham Stephan talks about, and this is now what a lot of the investor side of YouTube talk about. And they talked about this stuff mostly leading up to 2020 and a little bit afterwards, but again, they ran out of stuff to talk about because there's only so much that you can say about it. And it's mostly about, not spending your money on, Starbucks every day, and instead putting that into an index fund and then waiting until you retire, and then you have some money to retire on, right? And I was thinking to myself that as a Gen Xer, and I'm not big on this whole generational divide thing. I don't really believe in generations, but there is something about how we grew up and no one ever taught us anything about finances, right? Like, my parents were always about not necessarily budgeting, but never spending money, so they really did drill that down into my sister, my brother, and I, and we never really took it to heart. We kind of ignored that advice. But I think back in their day, in school, you at the very least learned like what would be called home economics, and people would be taught how to budget properly, right? And how to basically figure out the expenses of your household and manage it and put aside some money and stuff like that. And also, they didn't really need to learn how to invest because most of their jobs, if not all of their jobs, had a pension, and pensions work differently than what you call today 401ks or any other kind of, job contribution thing where some of your paycheck gets contributed and your employer matches it, and then it goes into some sort of fund, right? But a lot of people today don't even do that. Like, they don't contribute anything because they want whatever the biggest paycheck they can, and then they don't bother investing. So when we were younger in school, they never taught us either of those sides of it, either budgeting or getting whatever kind of investment you need. And even back then, it was still likely that you would get a pension when we were kids, so there was no real reason to teach us investing. But what's interesting today with the generations that came after Generation X, especially with YouTube, but also online forums, Reddit, that kind of thing, there's all kinds of information out there about how to do this. And a lot of it is conflicting, and a lot of it isn't good advice, and it's hard to find it, but it's out there. But what's important is that there are YouTubers who sort of teach this sort of thing. Now, some of them could be scam artists, and they're just adding this as part of their, repertoire of whatever videos they're making, because every investor has to make a video kind of about this subject. But if you watch enough of them, you can see that there's a through line that this is just sort of accepted wisdom, and it's not something that anyone in my generation would have come across at any point, other than maybe an investment book, a book about investing, right? And while my generation is more likely to have read a book than later generations, and I wouldn't say we all read a lot, because a lot of people were always confused in the lunchroom when I was reading a book, but I was reading a fantasy book. I wasn't reading financial books. And so even back then, most people wouldn't have read a financial book, and wouldn't even have known which was a good finance book to come across. Like I listened to things like Zig Ziglar and stuff like that on audiobook because my uncle had them. But for the most part, people would be reading something like a Stephen King or something like that. So we wouldn't have come across this information as easily. And then also with all the people out there that have their different styles and discussion points, we wouldn't have been able to get a robust discussion and be able to boil down what everyone's point is to what is probably true, the investing in index funds, because this is, enough people say this that even if it's a scam artist saying this, there's also someone that's trustworthy saying this, and they're all contradicting themselves in a lot of other places about, the day trading and the trading on margin and stuff like that. But this thing is consistent throughout the whole thing, and I think that I'd like to know if now the generation, the millennials and the Gen Zers have a better handle on this and whether they are investing, because it is better if they start putting money in their 20s into an index fund or some other kind of safe, stable investment that grows over time, and whether they, more importantly, understand this better than my generation did, because we didn't understand it all. I mean, bankers talked to me about this, and there were some times when it was mentioned, you should be investing in RSP. When RSPs first started, I guess, in the late 80s, early 90s, or at least when they started to be rolled out to retail, meaning that, retail banking was getting regular people involved in this, and then that's what kind of moved people out of pensions in the first place, right? They basically left it up to the individual to handle their own retirement. And I just wonder if now these new generations have a better handle on their retirement and the things and their investments than Gen Xers did, because we really don't. I mean, if you talk to pretty much any Gen Xer, you're going to find that they don't really have any investments whatsoever. That they might have money they've just left at a bank, or they're more likely just living paycheck to paycheck. However, they may have inherited their boomer parents, real estate, so they have that going for them. But I don't think that, I'd say it's a very small portion of Gen Xers that have any sort of investment, and if they do, then it's like, maybe 5,000, 10,000, 50,000, and then there might be some Gen Xers there who do have a million or several million in investments and did do these things, because I do know some people that were very good at this sort of thing, and their parents did teach them this, but a lot of people were not taught anything about this. And I just think that it's interesting that, going back to Alpha Investments, I don't know when people started doing this on YouTube, because I wasn't watching finance stuff on YouTube. And I think that, I guess what's that Dave something or other, the guy that tells you not to use credit at all except to buy a home. I forget his name now. So he was there for a while, and this kind of maybe started this kind of stuff, and then everyone started adding to it, copying it, whatever. But Alpha Investments was there giving this kind of advice too, and so that, you know, as someone who only deals with like Magic the Gathering or gaming or something like that, you would never see these investment channels, and you might see Alpha Investments, and from time to time he might offer you a little gem of advice, and maybe that would lead you to other sources of information about this, and maybe it helped. And I'm just wondering if that's a thing, and if so, that's pretty great. If now people understand how to properly save for their retirement, because it's something that wasn't a thing for the generations that grew up from the late 70s until the 90s, when we were like kids and teenagers. This kind of information was hard to come by, and no one was going out of their way to get it into our heads the proper way to do things financially, to budget, to save, to invest, right? Anyway, I just thought that was an interesting thing that even touches things about Magic the Gathering and, you know, how to run a store, that kind of stuff. And you can still find this information, and it can be helpful. So if you agree with this, or if you have something to add to it, just let me know, because this is kind of an interesting discussion, I think, and I'd like to see what more people think about it, about whether they think the kids of these new generations have a better handle on the knowledge of what to do to save for retirement. Not necessarily that they're in the best situation, but they know what they need to do. Anyway, let me know, and have a good day.